300 of the richest, most powerful people in the state were staring at a 6-year-old boy as if he had just changed the course of all their lives. Minutes earlier, Adeline Frost, the billionaire CEO everyone whispered about but no one dared pity aloud, had stood beneath the crystal chandeliers of the charity gala and repeated the vow that had made every ambitious man in the room dream and despair at the same time. She would only ever marry the man her son chose. It was supposed to be impossible. Everyone knew that. Her little boy Sam had barely spoken a word in 18 months, not since the accident that took his father and left his mother with a fortune, an empire, and a child who looked at the world as if sound itself had betrayed him. So when Sam suddenly let go of his mother's hand and stepped down from the stage, the ballroom went silent. He walked past senators, investors, heirs, polished gentlemen in tailored tuxedos who had spent months pretending to care about him. He did not stop for any of them. He crossed the glittering floor toward the very back of the room where the caterers stood, where the staff entered and exited, where a school bus driver in a rented suit was trying very hard not to be noticed. His name was Theo Marsh, and until that moment, no one in that room had looked at him twice. Sam stopped in front of him, lifted his small face, and took his hand. Then in a voice so clear it seemed to crack the air, the boy said, "This is my friend. He sees the dog with me." Gasps rose like a wave. Adeline covered her mouth. Someone laughed and whispered that the boy had finally chosen his mother's husband. But what Theo did in the next 30 seconds turned the entire fairy tale upside down. 300 of the richest, most powerful people in the state were staring at a 6-year-old boy as if he had just rewritten every rule in the room. Only a few minutes earlier, Adeline Frost had stood beneath the chandeliers of the Grand Meridian Hotel, flawless in a black silk gown, her face calm in the way only people trained by grief and cameras could appear calm, and repeated the sentence that had followed her for nearly 2 years. "I will only ever consider marrying again if my son chooses the man himself." The crowd had laughed politely when she said it, the way wealthy people laughed at statements they believed were charming but impossible. They all knew about Sam Frost. They knew the boy had barely spoken since the accident that killed his father. They knew that every therapist, specialist, child psychologist, and private doctor money could buy had tried to coax words back into him and failed. They also knew what Adeline's vow really meant. It was not romance. It was a locked gate wrapped in velvet. It was a beautiful woman's way of telling every ambitious man circling her fortune, her company, and her loneliness that the answer would always be no. Then Sam let go of his mother's hand. At first, no one understood what they were seeing. The boy simply stepped away from the stage, small and solemn in his miniature tuxedo, his dark hair neatly combed, his shoes shining against the ballroom floor. Adeline turned startled, but she did not stop him. Perhaps she was afraid that if she called his name, whatever fragile courage had moved him would disappear. Sam walked past men who had spent months trying to charm him. He passed a senator who had once sent him a signed baseball, an investor who had bought him a remote-controlled race car, a widowed real estate king who had knelt in front of him earlier that evening and called him champ, with the confidence of a man who had never been ignored by anyone. Sam did not glance at any of them. He crossed the ballroom with the slow certainty of a child who knew exactly where he was going. At the far end of the room, near the service doors, Theo Marsh stood holding a small plate with one untouched shrimp pastry on it, wishing he had never rented the suit that was cutting into his neck. He was a school bus driver, Route 12, 39 years old, single father, the sort of man who knew how to check mirrors, remember which children needed extra time on the steps, and disappear quietly in rooms where people measured worth by wristwatches and last names. When Theo saw Sam coming toward him, he looked over his shoulder. There had to be someone important behind him. There was no one. The boy stopped directly in front of him, lifted his face, and placed his hand in Theo's. The touch was small, warm, and terrifying. Theo felt every eye in the room move to him. Then Sam spoke. His voice was not loud, but the silence carried it. "This is my friend," he said. "He sees the dog with me." A sound moved through the ballroom, not quite a gasp and not quite a prayer. Adeline covered her mouth as if the words had struck her in the chest. Some people began to whisper. Others smiled too quickly, eager to turn a sacred thing into entertainment. Someone near the front gave a soft, delighted laugh and said, "Well, Adeline, it seems your son has made his choice." A few people joined in, relieved to understand the moment in a way that amused them. A fairy tale had appeared, and they were ready to applaud it. A billionaire widow, a silent child, a humble man selected from nowhere. Theo felt Sam's fingers tighten around his. In that pressure, he understood what the room did not. Sam had not crossed that floor to choose a husband for his mother. He had crossed it because, for the first time in 18 months, he had found enough courage to tell the world that someone had seen him. And if Theo allowed these people to turn that into a joke about marriage opportunity or fate, he would betray the very trust that had brought the boy to him. Before that night, Theo Marsh had never imagined that anyone like Adeline Frost would know his name. His world was not made of chandeliers, champagne towers, or charity auctions where one painting sold for more than he made in a year. His world began before sunrise in a small kitchen where the coffee maker wheezed like an old engine, and his daughter Lily sat at the table with sleepy eyes eating cereal while wearing one sock and searching for the other. Theo drove a yellow school bus for Briarwood Academy, an expensive private school with iron gates, manicured lawns, and parents who treated morning drop-off like a board meeting. He had taken the job because the hours allowed him to be there for Lily. He could wake her, feed her, braid her hair badly enough that she sometimes redid it herself, drive his route, work the midday maintenance shift, and still be waiting when she came home. It was not glamorous work, but Theo had stopped needing glamour a long time ago. He needed rent, paid, gas in the tank, and his daughter laughing at dinner. He needed days that made sense. People thought bus drivers only drove. Theo knew better. A bus driver was the first adult outside the house many children saw each morning and the last one they saw before returning home. He learned things no one told him. He knew which kids ran because they were excited and which ones ran because they were afraid of being late. He knew who came aboard hungry, who had cried before leaving home, who pretended not to care when no one saved them a seat. He could read exhaustion in the slope of a child's shoulders and loneliness in the way they pressed their forehead to the glass. He never called it a gift. It was simply what happened when you paid attention every day without demanding credit for it. Sam Frost joined Route 12 on a gray Tuesday in October. Theo remembered the day because the rain had made the road near Maple Street shine like black ribbon, and because the boy climbed onto the bus with the stillness of someone much older than 6. A woman Theo later learned was Pilar, the family's housekeeper and nanny, walked him to the curb beneath a large umbrella. "Good morning, Sam," Theo said as he said to every child. "Glad to have you with us." Sam did not answer. He did not look frightened exactly. He looked sealed. He moved to the third row on the right, sat by the window, and placed his backpack on his knees with both hands resting on top of it. For the entire ride, he watched the world pass without blinking much. Children whispered about him for the first week. Then, as children do, they adjusted. Sam became part of the route's furniture, the quiet boy in the third row who never caused trouble, never asked questions, never laughed at the jokes shouted from the back seats. Theo heard pieces of the story slowly. A teacher mentioned the accident. A parent spoke too loudly near the curb about Adeline Frost, the widowed CEO. One afternoon, the school counselor rode along for a safety observation and told Theo in careful professional language that Sam had experienced a severe traumatic loss and that adults should not pressure him to speak. Theo did not need the warning. He had already seen enough children carrying things too heavy for their age. The mistake adults made, he thought, was believing pain always wanted a question. Sometimes pain needed room. So he gave Sam exactly that. Every morning he said, "Good morning, Sam. Happy to see you." Every afternoon he said, "Step on up, buddy." Nothing more. No coaxing. No jokes designed to force a smile. No comments about silence. Theo treated him like a boy, not a puzzle. The dog appeared 2 weeks later. On Maple Street, behind a white fence, a golden retriever began racing the bus from one end of the yard to the other, ears flying, tail wild with joy. Most children noticed it once and forgot. Sam changed. It was almost invisible, the kind of change only someone who watched the mirrors would catch. His head lifted before they reached the house. His fingers loosened on his backpack. His eyes followed the dog until the fence ended. The first time Theo noticed, he almost smiled. The second time he eased off the gas just enough to give the boy 3 extra seconds. By the fifth time, it had become part of the route. He never announced it. He did not look at Sam afterward to claim gratitude. He simply slowed near the white fence, let the golden dog perform its ridiculous morning parade, and continued on. One afternoon, months after Sam first climbed onto Route 12, the boy paused on the bottom step before getting off. Children were filing past behind him, impatient and loud, but Sam stood still. He pointed down the street toward Maple. Then he looked at Theo. It was not a question spoken in words, but Theo understood it clearly. "You see it too?" Theo nodded once. "Good dog," he said gently. "I look forward to seeing him too." Sam held his gaze for 1 second longer than usual. Then he gave a small nod and stepped down to Pilar. That was their first real conversation. After that, the world did not transform in any dramatic way. Sam did not suddenly begin speaking in full sentences. He did not run laughing down the aisle or tell Theo all his secrets. Healing, Theo knew, rarely arrived like thunder. Sometimes it came like a porch light left on night after night until someone believed it was safe to come home. Sam began lifting his hand when he boarded. Later, he drew a picture on folded paper and left it on the driver's seat without a word. It showed a yellow bus, a brownish gold dog, and 2 figures in the front, one large, one small. Theo taped it above his visor where the sun would not fade it too quickly. The next morning, Sam saw it and looked away fast, but not before Theo caught the smallest curve at the corner of his mouth. That drawing was still there the night Theo stood in the Grand Meridian ballroom, wearing a rented suit and holding the hand of the boy everyone suddenly believed had chosen him for a life he had never asked to enter. The laughter around them grew polished and hungry. Adeline was moving toward them through the crowd, her eyes wet, her expression torn between miracle and fear. Theo looked down at Sam. The boy's face had gone pale. He had done a brave thing, and already the adults were taking it away from him, reshaping it into something easier for themselves to understand. Theo set the plate aside. Then he slowly knelt until he was eye level with Sam, lowering himself out of the crowd's story and back into the only one that mattered. "Sam," he said softly so the boy heard him before anyone else did, "what you just did was one of the bravest things I've ever seen." Sam's fingers trembled in his. Theo smiled, but his chest hurt. "Thank you for telling them I'm your friend. I'm proud to be that." The murmurs faded. People leaned in expecting some charming response, some humble acceptance, some line that would complete the fairy tale. Theo stood, gently released Sam's hand, and turned toward Adeline Frost, and the room that had mistaken a child's trust for a public proposal. Then he told them the truth. Theo Marsh had spent most of his adult life learning how not to take up too much space. On narrow streets, he pulled the bus close enough to the curb so children would not step into puddles. In parent meetings, when drivers were invited but not expected to speak, he sat at the end of the table and listened. At school events, he stood near walls, held doors, nodded politely, and let conversations move around him like water around a stone. He had never minded being overlooked. There was safety in it. There was peace in doing a useful job without needing applause. But that night, under the chandeliers of the Grand Meridian ballroom, invisibility was stripped from him in a single instant, and every face in the room seemed to ask the same question. What will you do with this chance? He could see it in the lifted brows of businessmen who knew the value of opportunity. He could see it in the amused smiles of women clutching champagne glasses, already imagining the story they would repeat the next morning. He could see it in the hard, measuring eyes of men who had spent months trying to reach Adeline Frost through dinners, donations, expensive gifts, and false tenderness toward her son. To them, Sam's small hand in Theo's had become a key. To Theo, it felt like a bird that had landed there after surviving a storm. Something delicate. Something that would be crushed if he closed his fingers too tightly. Adeline stopped a few feet away from him. Up close, she looked less like the woman from magazine covers and more like a mother who had forgotten how to breathe. Tears had gathered along her lashes, but she did not wipe them away. Her gaze moved from Theo to Sam, then back again, as if she were trying to understand how a man she had never met had heard her son speak when doctors with framed degrees and soft voices had not. Theo recognized that look. He had seen versions of it on parents at bus stops when children finally admitted they were being bullied, or when a quiet girl suddenly ran laughing into her father's arms after months of walking with her head down. It was the look of an adult realizing that a child had been living a secret life of pain and courage right beside them. Someone near the stage said, "Well, Mr. Marsh, I hope you understand the honor you've just received." The man's tone was smooth, but the words carried a hook. Theo turned slightly. The speaker was Carlton Hayes, though Theo did not know his name then. He knew only that the man had a silver tie clip, a watch thin enough to be more expensive than Theo's car, and the confidence of someone accustomed to rooms arranging themselves around his voice. Mrs. Frost made a promise, Carlton continued, smiling toward the crowd. And children, as they say, are excellent judges of character. A few people chuckled. Cameras lifted. That was what alarmed Theo most. Not the laughter, not the whispers, not even the sudden heat of humiliation rising under his collar. It was the phones. Their black little lenses pointed at Sam, hungry to preserve a moment the boy had not offered to strangers. Theo imagined the clip posted online before dessert was served. Silent billionaire heir chooses mother's future husband. People would comment heart emojis and jokes. News sites would call it heartwarming. Talk shows would invite experts to discuss destiny grief, second chances. And somewhere inside all of that noise, Sam's real message would vanish. He had not said, "Marry my mother." He had said, "This is my friend." He had said, "He sees the dog with me." The difference was everything. Theo looked down at him. Sam's shoulders were beginning to curl inward. The boy had been brave enough to walk across a ballroom, but bravery did not make him immune to being swallowed by adults. Theo knew that collapse when he saw it. He had seen children shrink after saying something true and watching grown-ups turn it into gossip. He had seen trust drain from young faces when the world answered honesty with spectacle. He would not let that happen here. He raised one hand, not dramatically, not like a man claiming a stage, but like a driver asking for quiet before children crossed the street. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was not loud. Somehow, perhaps because it did not perform, it cut through the room more sharply than Carlton's polished joke had. The laughter thinned. A few phones remained up. Theo waited until some of them lowered, not all. Men like Carlton did not surrender an audience easily. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Theo said. A ripple of surprise moved across the room. Adeline's expression changed. Not disappointment exactly. Fear, maybe. The fear of a mother who had watched too many people mishandle her child and was bracing for one more injury. Theo turned to her first. "Mrs. Frost, I drive Route 12 for Briarwood Academy. Your son rides my bus." "I know," Adeline whispered, though from the stunned look on her face, Theo suspected she had not known until that very moment. Perhaps Pilar knew. Perhaps some assistant handled transportation schedules. Perhaps Adeline signed forms between board meetings and hospital appointments and charity calls without ever seeing the name of the man who greeted her son every morning. Theo did not blame her. Grief made ordinary details blur. Wealth did too, though, in a different way. "Sam is one of the finest children on that route," Theo continued. "Quiet, yes, but quiet doesn't mean empty. It doesn't mean broken. It certainly doesn't mean he can be used to complete a story the rest of us find entertaining." The room went still in a colder way. Carlton's smile tightened. No one meant any harm. Theo nodded once. "I believe that. But harm doesn't always need bad intentions. Sometimes it only needs people to forget there's a child standing in the middle of the room. Adeline inhaled sharply. Sam moved closer to her now, but his eyes stayed on Theo. Theo felt the old instinct to apologize, to soften himself, to step back into the invisible place where people like him were more comfortable. But then he remembered Sam on the bus step pointing toward Maple Street. He remembered the drawing tucked above his visor. He remembered the way the boy's fingers had trembled tonight after speaking. So he did not retreat. "I'm honored that Sam called me his friend," Theo said. "More honored than I can explain. But that is what he chose. A friend, not a husband for his mother, not a prize for me, not a headline for anyone here." No one laughed now. Theo faced the room fully, and for the first time that evening, the rented suit no longer felt ridiculous. It felt irrelevant. "A child's trust is not a lottery ticket," he said. "It is not a bridge to someone's money. It is not permission for adults to turn grief into romance before he understands what we're doing with his words." Somewhere near the back, a server stopped pretending not to listen. A woman in emerald silk slowly lowered her champagne glass. Theo saw several men glance away. It was not shame on all their faces. Some looked irritated as if he had ruined a game they had been winning. But others seemed struck by the simplicity of what he was saying. Perhaps they had needed the obvious spoken aloud. Then Theo crouched again because speeches were not the point. Sam was. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. Sam looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes. "You did good tonight," Theo told him. "You said something true. That's all you had to do." Sam's mouth pressed into a small line. He looked as if he wanted to speak again, but could not find the path. Theo gave him a quiet smile. "Monday morning, I'll be at your stop. Same bus, same seat if you want it. And when we pass Maple Street..." He paused, letting the promise become something private again. "I'll slow down a little." Sam's face changed then. Not much. Not enough for the room to understand, but Theo saw it. The fear loosened. The boy gave the smallest nod. Adeline's tears spilled over. She did not sob. She did not make herself the center of the moment. She simply stood there, one hand near her mouth, watching a stranger protect her son from a room full of people who admired her too loudly to notice what he needed. Theo rose. He looked at her. "Mrs. Frost," he said, "your son is not a gate someone has to pass through to reach you. He's a child. He deserves to be loved without being useful." For a moment, Adeline seemed unable to answer. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Perhaps she was hearing all the things no one had dared say to her. Perhaps she was remembering every man who had arrived with gifts for Sam and eyes for her. Perhaps she was realizing that her vow meant as a shield had placed her son in a position no child should carry. Theo saw the realization cross her face, and he wished he had found a gentler way to deliver it. But gentleness without truth could become another form of cowardice. Carlton stepped forward, his charm cracking at the edges. "This is a rather dramatic interpretation, don't you think?" Theo glanced at him. "No, sir. Dramatic is asking a grieving 6-year-old to decide the future of a billionaire's love life in front of 300 witnesses. I'm trying to make it ordinary again." A murmur spread through the ballroom, different from before. Less amused, more awake. Adeline turned toward Carlton. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, but sharp enough to make the nearest people straighten. "That will be enough, Carlton." The man froze. For the first time all evening, he looked unsure of where to put his hands. Theo did not wait to enjoy the silence. He had not come to win. Winning would have meant staying, letting gratitude and curiosity gather around him, letting people pat his shoulder and ask about his life, as if kindness were a rare trick performed for their entertainment. He had a daughter at home with Mrs. Alvarez from next door, probably asleep on the couch with a book open on her chest. He had an early route on Monday. He had no business standing in the center of a ballroom that had already taken too much from one small boy. So he picked up his coat from the chair near the service door. A few people watched as if leaving were the most shocking thing he had done. Perhaps to them it was. Opportunity once placed in a man's hand was supposed to be held. Theo had opened his palm. He looked once more at Sam. "See you Monday," he said. Sam nodded again. This time, though, he lifted his hand. Not high, just enough. Theo returned the gesture. Then he walked out. The hallway beyond the ballroom was quiet, except for the distant clatter of dishes and the low hum of hotel air conditioning. The carpet swallowed his footsteps. For the first time in 10 minutes, Theo could breathe without tasting other people's attention. He reached the elevator and pressed the down button with a finger that was not as steady as he wanted it to be. Only when the doors closed did he realize his heart was racing. He leaned back against the mirrored wall and let out a long breath. "What did you just do?" he whispered to himself. The elevator descended smoothly, indifferent to ruined fairy tales. In the reflection, Theo saw a tired man in an ill-fitting suit, his tie slightly crooked, his face pale beneath the hotel lights. He did not look noble. He did not look heroic. He looked like a bus driver who had spoken too much in a room where he had intended to say nothing. His phone buzzed as he crossed the lobby. A text from Mrs. Alvarez. "Lily is asleep. She tried to wait up. There are cookies on the counter." Theo smiled despite everything. That was his world. Cookies on a counter, a sleeping child, rent due next Friday, a yellow bus waiting in the depot. He stepped out into the cold night away from the golden windows of the hotel and walked toward the parking garage where his old sedan sat between cars that cost more than houses. Behind him in the ballroom, people would still be talking. They would decide whether he was foolish, admirable, rude, or saintly. They would reshape him too if they could. But he hoped more than anything that Sam would remember only the part that mattered. His words had been heard correctly by at least one adult. And for Theo Marsh, that was enough. By Monday morning, the story had already escaped the ballroom. Theo knew it before he reached the bus depot. He knew it from the way two mechanics stopped talking when he walked in. He knew it from the dispatcher pretending to study a clipboard that had been upside down in her hands. He knew it from the 3 missed calls from a number he did not recognize, and the text message from a fellow driver that said, "You're famous, man." Theo stood beside bus 17 in the dim blue light before sunrise and stared at the phone until the screen went dark. Famous was not a word that belonged anywhere near him. Famous was for singers, athletes, politicians, women like Adeline Frost. Not for a man who kept extra napkins in his glove compartment because kindergartners spilled juice on themselves. Not for a man whose left boot had a crack he kept meaning to fix with glue. Still, the world had a way of grabbing ordinary people by the collar when they accidentally wandered into a story it liked. He started the engine, listened to the familiar rumble settle under his feet, and tried to let the sound pull him back into the life he understood. The first half of the route went almost normally. Children climbed aboard with backpacks, bouncing arguments already in progress, sleep still stuck to their faces. Theo greeted each one by name. "Morning, Jade. Careful on the step. Hey, Marcus, hat off before class today, remember? Good morning, Ella. Big science project." The rhythm helped. It reminded him that the world did not begin and end in a ballroom. There were permission slips to remember, spelling tests to dread, lunchboxes forgotten on kitchen counters. Ordinary things, necessary things. But as he approached the Frost stop, his hands tightened slightly on the wheel. Pilar was waiting at the curb with Sam beneath the bare branches of a maple tree. The boy wore his usual navy coat and carried the same dark backpack. From a distance, nothing about him seemed different. Yet when Theo opened the door, he felt something pass between the three of them that had not been there before. Pilar's eyes were red. She looked at Theo with a gratitude so direct it almost made him step backward. He nodded to her, then turned to Sam. "Good morning, Sam," he said, using the same tone he had used on the first day and every day after. "Happy to see you." For one breath, the boy stood still on the sidewalk. Then he climbed the steps. He did not speak, but he lifted his hand and placed 2 fingers lightly on the rail beside Theo, a small greeting hidden inside a normal movement. Theo understood. He gave no sign except the faintest nod because public miracles were expensive things, and he had no intention of charging Sam twice for the same courage. Sam walked to the 3rd row on the right and sat by the window. When they passed Maple Street, the golden retriever was waiting. The dog ran along the fence, ridiculous and joyful, kicking up dead leaves with its paws. Theo slowed just as he had promised. Behind him, the bus grew momentarily quieter, though most of the children did not know why. In the mirror, Theo saw Sam's face turn toward the window. The boy's mouth softened. Not a smile exactly, but something close enough to matter. At the school, the principal was waiting near the drop-off lane. That was unusual. Dr. Helen Mora usually stood at the front entrance only during inspections assemblies or disasters involving weather. She approached after the last child stepped down, her scarf pulled tight against the cold. "Theo," she said gently, "could I speak with you before you pull around?" He put the bus in park. "Sure." Her expression was kind but worried. "I saw the video." Of course she had. Theo had not watched it, but he knew enough. Someone had filmed the moment. Someone had posted it. The internet had done what the internet did, squeezing meaning into captions and turning human beings into symbols before breakfast. He rubbed one hand over his jaw. "How bad is it?" "That depends on what you mean by bad." Dr. Mora glanced toward the school doors where Sam had already disappeared inside with his class. "Many people are praising you. Some are calling you ungrateful. A few reporters have contacted the school. We're not giving statements." Theo closed his eyes briefly. "I'm sorry. You don't need to apologize for protecting a child," she said. "But you should know this may not disappear quickly." He looked toward the entrance. "How's Sam?" "Quiet this morning, but not withdrawn." Her voice softened. "His teacher said he answered roll call." Theo turned sharply. "He did." "One word," Dr. Mora said. "Present." The word hit him harder than applause ever could have. Present. Not healed. Not fixed. Not transformed into some easy ending. Just present. Here. Counted. Willing for one small second to let the room hear him exist. Theo swallowed. "That's good." "It is," she said. "And Theo," he looked back at her, "whatever happens outside this school, keep doing what you were doing before. Children need consistency more than spectacle." That was advice he trusted because it sounded like something true. He nodded. "I can do that." The spectacle, however, did not wait outside forever. By afternoon, a local news van had parked across from the school entrance. Theo saw the reporter first, a woman in a red coat standing beside a cameraman scanning faces as if searching for the humble hero from the video. He considered asking the school to send another driver, then rejected the thought with irritation at himself. Route 12 was his responsibility. More importantly, Sam would be expecting bus 17, so Theo pulled up to the curb, opened the doors, and did his job. The children noticed the news van immediately. Children noticed everything adults hoped they would miss. They whispered, pointed, asked questions. Theo kept his voice steady. "Seats, please. Backpacks out of the aisle." Sam boarded near the end, Pilar beside him as usual. The reporter took one step forward. Theo saw Sam's shoulders stiffen. That was enough. Pilar, Theo called quietly, "Would you mind stepping up for a second?" She did, confused but trusting. Theo leaned toward her, keeping his voice low. "Can you sit with Sam today, third row? Window side if he wants it. I'll close the door right after." Pilar's eyes flicked toward the reporter. She understood immediately. Of course. The moment Sam and Pilar were on board, Theo shut the doors. The reporter raised a hand as if asking him to wait. He did not. He checked his mirrors, signaled, and pulled away from the curb with the slow authority of a man operating a vehicle full of children and therefore answerable to something more important than television. No one spoke for several blocks. Then a boy from the fifth row asked Mr. Marsh, "Are you going to marry Sam's mom?" A few children giggled. Theo kept his eyes on the road. He had expected the question. That did not make it easier. "No," he said calmly. "Why not another child?" asked. "She's rich." More laughter. Theo smiled faintly, not because it was funny, but because the honesty of children was sometimes cleaner than the politeness of adults. "That's not how families work," he said. "People aren't prizes, and kids don't have to choose grown-up things like that." A girl near the front frowned thoughtfully. "Then what did Sam choose?" Theo glanced at the mirror. Sam was looking down at his hands. Pilar sat beside him, still as a guard at a gate. "He chose to tell the truth about someone he trusts," Theo said. "That's all." The bus went quiet again, but it was a different quiet. Children were thinking. Theo liked it when children thought. Adults often feared silence because they imagined it empty, Children used it to build doors. At Maple Street, the golden retriever was in its yard again. Theo slowed, careful not to make the moment too obvious. The dog bounded alongside the fence, mouth open, tongue out, foolish with happiness. This time something unexpected happened. A small voice from the third row said, barely louder than the engine, "His name should be Sunshine." The entire bus froze. Theo did not turn around. He did not gasp. He did not say, "Sam, you spoke." He did not make the mistake of grabbing the moment until it broke. Instead, he looked at the dog through the windshield and nodded, as if comments from Sam Frost were as ordinary as weather. "Sunshine suits him," he said. Behind him, Pilar made a tiny sound that she quickly covered with her hand. No one else spoke. Even the children seemed to understand with that strange grace they sometimes possessed that something fragile had entered the bus and needed quiet around it. When Theo reached Sam's stop, Pilar walked him down the steps. Sam paused on the sidewalk, turned back, and looked at Theo. "Monday," Theo said, though it was already Monday and the word made no logical sense except between them. Sam's eyes met his. "Tomorrow," the boy corrected softly. Then he walked toward the Frost house, leaving Theo with one hand on the wheel and a throat too tight for speech. That evening, Theo told Lily only part of the story. She was sitting cross-legged at the kitchen table, coloring a dragon purple, because, as she explained, green dragons were too expected. Theo warmed soup on the stove and tried to answer her questions without making Sam sound like a headline. "So the boy talked because of you?" Lily asked. "No," Theo said. "He talked because he was ready." "But you helped." "Maybe a little." Lily considered that. She had her mother's sharp eyes, though Theo rarely allowed himself to think that for long. Her mother, Rebecca, was alive somewhere in Arizona, sending birthday cards sometimes and excuses more often. Lily had learned early that love could be inconsistent, which made Theo determined that his would not be. He placed a bowl of soup in front of her. "Did you like the rich lady?" Lily asked. Theo nearly dropped the spoon. "What?" "The boy's mom. The one people online say you should marry." "Lily, what kids at school were talking?" She blew on her soup. "They said she's pretty." Theo sighed. "She is Sam's mother, that's all." Lily studied him with 7-year-old seriousness. "You say, 'that's all,' when it is not all." He pointed at her bowl. "Eat your soup, detective." She grinned, but the question stayed with him after she went to bed. Not because he had romantic fantasies about Adeline Frost. He didn't. He had barely spoken to her. What stayed with him was her face when he told the room Sam was not a gate. He had seen pain there, but also recognition, as if someone had opened a window in a house she had not realized was full of smoke. 3 days later, after the story had begun to fade from the loudest corners of the internet, but not from Theo's life, he saw her again. It was late afternoon. The route was nearly finished, and the sky had turned the pale gold of winter sunlight slipping away. Bus 17 rolled toward Maple Street. Theo expected the dog. He expected the fence, the familiar yard, perhaps Sam leaning toward the window. What he did not expect was Adeline Frost standing at the bus stop in jeans, a gray sweater, and no visible security. Her hair pulled back, simply her hands tucked into her coat pockets like any other parent waiting in the cold. For a moment, Theo thought he had imagined her. Women like Adeline did not stand alone beside ordinary roads while school buses hissed to a stop in front of them. Yet there she was, not polished for a gala, not surrounded by donors or men with expensive smiles. Just a mother waiting near the street where a golden retriever had accidentally helped her son find a way back to words. Theo opened the door. Sam looked from his mother to Theo, then back again. There was no fear in his face this time, only curiosity. Adeline stepped closer to the bus but did not climb aboard. "Mr. Marsh," she said. Her voice sounded different outside the ballroom, less controlled, more human. Theo nodded. "Mrs. Frost." "I was hoping," she said, then stopped, as if the sentence she had prepared no longer fit. She glanced at Sam. "I wanted to thank you properly." Theo looked at the children still on the bus, then at Pilar, who had come forward to stand behind Sam. He could feel a dozen young ears stretching toward the conversation. "This probably isn't the best place," he said. "No," Adeline agreed quickly. "Of course, I'm sorry." But before she could step back, Sam spoke from the third row. "Mom," he said, "that's sunshine." Adeline's face changed completely. She turned toward the yard where the golden retriever was racing the fence. The dog barked once, triumphant and absurd. Sam pointed, not hiding now. "That's the dog," he said. Adeline pressed one hand to her chest. "I see him." Theo watched her watch her son. The gratitude in her expression was almost painful, but beneath it was something sadder. She was realizing that this small, daily wonder had existed in Sam's life for months without her knowing. Not because she did not love him, because grief, work, fear, and the machinery of wealth had built walls around the simplest parts of his day. The bus was quiet. The dog ran. Sam looked between the two adults with cautious hope. Adeline turned back to Theo. "Maybe after your route," she said softly. "Just a few minutes. Here, if that's all right." Theo should have said no. Every practical instinct told him to avoid this. People were still talking. Cameras might return. Men like Carlton Hayes would twist anything they saw. And Adeline Frost belonged to a world where even kindness could become complicated. But Sam was watching him. Not asking him to marry his mother. Not asking him to become anything grand. Simply watching to see whether two adults he trusted could speak honestly without turning his life into a performance. Theo nodded once. "I'll finish the route and circle back." Adeline's shoulders loosened. "Thank you." As she stepped away, Sam settled back into his seat. Theo closed the door and pulled carefully from the curb. In the mirror, he saw the boy watching his mother grow smaller behind them, standing beside Maple Street with the winter light around her, and the dog still running behind the fence. For the first time, Theo wondered not about the billionaire everyone talked about, but about the woman beneath all that armor. And for reasons he did not yet understand, that worried him more than the cameras. Theo finished the rest of the afternoon route with a strange awareness sitting beside him like an extra passenger. He stopped at familiar corners, watched children tumble down the steps into waiting arms, reminded two boys not to shove each other with their backpacks, and returned 3 forgotten mittens to their owners. Outwardly, nothing changed. The bus still hissed at every stop. The mirrors still needed checking. The road still demanded his full attention. But in the back of his mind, Adeline Frost remained standing beneath the bare branches on Maple Street, looking nothing like the untouchable woman from the gala, and too much like someone who had finally run out of places to hide. Theo did not know what she wanted from him beyond thanks. He hoped it was only that. Gratitude was manageable. Gratitude could be accepted, folded neatly, and put away. Anything more complicated had sharp edges. When the last child stepped off and the bus was empty except for the stale warmth of the heater and the faint smell of crayons, Theo sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. He could return to the depot. That would be the sensible thing. He could tell himself that Adeline would understand. Rich people were used to being disappointed by those beneath them. Perhaps she would even respect his caution. But then he saw Sam's face in the mirror of his memory, calm and hopeful when his mother said she saw the dog. That was what turned the key. This was not about Adeline's world. It was about a child learning that the adults around him could meet in the truth instead of pretending around him. Theo turned the bus around. Maple Street was nearly quiet when he returned. The golden retriever had disappeared, probably called inside for dinner, but the white fence still held the last of the sunlight. Adeline was there exactly where she had said she would be. No driver, no assistant, no security guard pretending not to watch from a nearby car. She stood alone, arms folded against the cold eyes following the bus as it slowed. Theo parked along the curb, opened the door, and stepped down. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Without the ballroom around her, Adeline seemed younger. Not young exactly, but less preserved. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes, and the wind had loosened strands of hair around her face. Theo wondered how many people ever saw her without preparation. He suspected almost no one. "Thank you for coming back," she said. "I said I would." A small, sad smile touched her mouth. "I'm beginning to understand that means something with you." Theo looked away toward the fence. Compliments from parents made him uncomfortable, especially when they sounded like they were carrying more weight than he knew how to hold. "How's Sam?" "He talked all evening after the gala," she said, and her voice trembled at the edge of the sentence. Not constantly, not like before, but more than he has in 18 months. He asked if the dog had a name. He asked whether your bus was hard to drive. He asked if Monday was far away. Theo tried to absorb that quietly. That's good. It's more than good. Adeline pressed her lips together, controlling herself with visible effort. It felt like hearing a door open in a house I thought had been sealed shut. Theo had no answer for that. Some sentences deserved silence. She turned toward the fence. I didn't know about the dog. Theo nodded. I figured I should have. There was no self-pity in her tone. That made it harder to dismiss. I know his doctor's names. I know which therapy techniques make him withdraw and which ones he tolerates. I know what foods he stopped eating after his father died. I know how many nights he wakes up from dreams. But I didn't know there was a dog on Maple Street that made him look out the window differently. She let out a quiet breath that almost broke. What kind of mother misses that? A grieving one, Theo said. Adeline looked at him. He regretted the bluntness immediately, but not the truth. You didn't miss it because you don't love him. You missed it because you were trying to keep 100 other pieces from falling. Her eyes shone. People usually tell me I'm strong. Are they wrong? No. She gave a faint laugh with no humor in it, but strong is a lonely compliment. It lets everyone admire the wall without asking what it cost to build. Theo leaned back against the bus, keeping enough distance to make the conversation feel safe. Cars moved on a distant road. Somewhere nearby, a garage door rumbled open. Ordinary neighborhood sounds made the moment feel almost unreal. He had spoken to parents at curbs for years about forgotten lunches, behavior problems, field trip forms, and children who had fallen asleep on the ride home. He had never stood beside a billionaire CEO while she quietly admitted that strength had become a cage. My husband Daniel used to do the mornings, Adeline said after a while. Not every day. His schedule was impossible too, but he insisted on taking Sam to preschool when he could. He made pancakes shaped like things that were never recognizable. He sang terribly. Sam adored him. She smiled, but it did not last. After the accident, everyone told me to keep things normal. So I tried. I kept the company stable. I kept the house running. I kept every appointment. I hired everyone who was supposed to know how to help. I thought if I built enough structure around Sam, he would feel safe. Her voice dropped. But maybe all he felt was surrounded. Theo shook his head. Don't do that. Do what? Turn every hard thing into proof you failed. She looked at him sharply, not offended but startled. Theo folded his arms, uncomfortable with how much he meant what he was saying. I've seen good parents make wrong calls. I've made plenty myself. But a bad parent doesn't stand in the cold waiting for a bus driver because her kid said 4 words about a dog. Adeline's face softened in a way that made Theo look away again. Tell me about your daughter, she said. The shift surprised him. Lily, that's her name. Yeah, she's 7. She thinks dragons should be purple. Adults are bad at logic, and cereal tastes better when eaten from a mug. For the first time, Adeline laughed. It was small but real, and it changed her whole face. Theo understood suddenly why powerful men might become foolish around her, though he distrusted the thought the moment it arrived. She sounds wonderful, Adeline said. She is. His voice warmed before he could guard it. Stubborn, kind, too observant for my own good, her mother. The question was gentle, not prying. Still, Theo felt the old reflex close around him. Not around much. I'm sorry. It's been that way long enough that sorry doesn't quite fit anymore. He watched a leaf slide along the curb. Rebecca left when Lily was 3. She didn't vanish completely. Calls sometimes. Birthday cards if she remembers. She loves Lily in her way, I think. Just not in a way that shows up consistently. Adeline was quiet. Theo appreciated that she did not rush to condemn a woman she did not know. Wealthy or not, she understood absence. So you chose the bus route because of Lily, she said. Partly. Hours work. Health insurance helps. And... He paused, unsure why he was admitting this. I like knowing children get somewhere safely. Sounds simple, but simple things matter. They do. Adeline looked toward the house behind the fence. Sam noticed you because of that, didn't he? Not because you tried to impress him. I didn't have anything impressive to offer. You had patience. Theo shrugged. That shouldn't be rare. But it is. The words settled between them. For a while, they stood without speaking. Theo expected the quiet to become awkward, but it didn't. That unsettled him. He was accustomed to conversations with wealthy parents carrying some invisible transaction beneath them. A request, a complaint, a judgment disguised as concern. Adeline asked for nothing. She simply stood there like a tired person who had found by accident another tired person willing to tell the truth. "I owe you an apology," she said. Theo frowned. For what? For the vow. She looked embarrassed now, and the sight felt strangely intimate. At the time, it seemed clever. Men kept appearing with flowers for me and toys for Sam. They studied him like a door code. If he liked dinosaurs, they arrived with museum memberships. If he looked at a soccer ball once, they suddenly loved youth sports. I was exhausted, angry, afraid of bringing someone near him who would perform tenderness until he trusted them and then leave damage behind. So I said Sam would choose. Since he never spoke to any of them, it protected us. Her voice thinned. I didn't understand that I had placed a burden on him anyway. Theo did not soften the truth, but he did not sharpen it either. You were trying to protect him with the tools you had, and you protected him from one of those tools. He looked down at the pavement. I just didn't want them stealing his moment. They would have, she said. If you had smiled and played along, every person in that ballroom would have applauded. They would have called it beautiful. I might have been too overwhelmed to stop them. She swallowed. You did. Theo heard the gratitude, but something else too. Respect, perhaps. That was more dangerous. Gratitude fades when the event passes. Respect tends to stay and ask questions. I don't want anything from you, he said more abruptly than he intended. Adeline blinked. He pushed on because retreating now would be worse. I mean, I don't want you thinking I helped Sam because I expected something. I don't need a reward. I don't want interviews, money, a better job, any of that. I know. You can't know that. You don't know me. No, she said softly. But Sam does. That stopped him. Adeline let the sentence stand, then added, and I'm learning. Theo looked at her, then really looked and saw no manipulation in her face. Only exhaustion, gratitude, and a kind of careful hope she seemed afraid to hold openly. He thought of Lily at home, probably making Mrs. Alvarez judge another drawing contest. He thought of the cracked boot, the unpaid dentist bill folded in a drawer, the 1,000 practical reasons he should keep distance from a woman whose life attracted cameras and men like Carlton Hayes. He thought of Sam saying, tomorrow, in a voice that had returned like a match struck in darkness. I should get the bus back, he said. Adeline nodded, quickly stepping away as if she had expected him to leave sooner. Of course. I've kept you too long. You didn't. She smiled faintly. Another honest answer. Most of mine are boring. I don't think boring is the word I would use. The compliment was quiet enough to pretend it wasn't one. Theo chose to pretend. He climbed back onto the bus, then paused with one hand on the rail. Mrs. Frost. Yes. Don't ask Sam too many questions tonight. Her expression shifted into attention. He may talk, he may not. Either way, let it be normal. Adeline nodded, absorbing the instruction with the seriousness of someone receiving medicine. Normal, she repeated. Harder than it sounds. I'm discovering that. Theo closed the door and started the engine. As he pulled away, he saw her in the mirror still standing beside Maple Street. She was no longer looking at the bus. She was looking at the fence at the empty yard where the dog had been, as if a missing piece of her son's life had briefly appeared there and might return if she waited with enough patience. That night, Adeline did not question Sam when he spoke at dinner. She wanted to. Every word from him felt like a cup of water placed before someone dying of thirst. When he said Pilar put too much butter, Adeline nearly cried into her plate. When he asked, can we see sunshine tomorrow? She had to grip her napkin beneath the table. But she remembered Theo's warning. Normal. So she only said, we can walk by the fence after school if you'd like. Sam considered this. He runs fast. I saw. He's not ours. Number. Maybe he has a family. I think he does. Sam ate 3 more bites of pasta. Then he said, Mr. Marsh has Lily. Adeline looked up carefully. His daughter. Sam nodded. Did he tell you about her? On the bus. Not to me. He looked down. To another kid. She likes purple dragons, Adeline smiled. That sounds nice. Sam nodded again and the conversation drifted away. No dramatic confession followed, no flood of stored-up grief. He did not mention his father or the gala or the way strangers had laughed when he held Theo's hand. But after dinner, when Adeline tucked him into bed, Sam reached for the stuffed bear Daniel had once won from a boardwalk game and whispered, "Dad would like the dog." The room tilted. Adeline sat on the edge of the bed. For months after Daniel's death, any mention of him had sent Sam into a silence so deep it frightened her. Now he lay beneath his blue blanket, eyes open, waiting. "I think he would," she said, her voice steady, only because love demanded it. "Your dad loved dogs." "He wanted one." "Yes." She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "He did." Sam hugged the bear. Maybe one day. Adeline could not speak for a moment. Then she leaned down and kissed his hair. Maybe one day. Later, after Sam fell asleep, she went downstairs to the kitchen and stood in the dark without turning on the light. The house around her was beautiful, enormous, and too quiet. For nearly 2 years, she had filled that quiet with experts, schedules, work calls, charity obligations, and the constant pressure to remain impressive enough that no one would see how frightened she was. Theo Marsh had stepped into her life for less than 5 minutes in a ballroom and had seen the mistake at the center of all of it. Not because he was brilliant in the way boardrooms use the word, because he paid attention. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Carlton Hayes' name appeared on the screen. Adeline watched it ring. Once she might have answered out of habit, strategy, politeness, or the fear of making an enemy in a world where men with money disliked being ignored. Tonight, she let the call go dark. Then she opened her contacts, found the household transportation file Pilar had sent months ago, and looked at the name she had never noticed before. Theodore Marsh. Route 12. For a long time, she simply stared at it. Not because her son had chosen him for her. That had never been true. Because for the first time in years, someone outside her fortress had reminded her what choosing for herself might one day feel like. In the weeks that followed, Theo Marsh discovered that some stories did not end when people stopped talking about them. The news vans disappeared first. Then the online comments moved on to newer scandals, newer miracles, newer strangers whose lives could be flattened into entertainment. At Briarwood Academy, the whispers softened into ordinary school noise. Children still asked strange questions sometimes because children had memories like pockets full of pebbles, always finding one forgotten thing to turn over in their hands. But even that faded. What remained was quieter and far more difficult to ignore. Sam Frost now said good morning some days. Not every day, and never when too many faces were watching, but often enough that Theo learned not to let surprise show on his face. When the bus passed Maple Street, Sam sometimes offered observations in a voice meant only for the front half of the bus. Sunshine is wet today. Sunshine has a red ball. Sunshine is not outside. Theo answered each one as if they were discussing weather because that was how trust survived. Not by turning every word into a celebration, but by making room for the next one. Adeline began walking Sam to the bus stop herself twice a week. The first morning she did it, Pilar stood a few steps behind them, smiling as if she had been waiting years to see her employer perform so ordinary a task. Adeline wore a wool coat and boots that were too expensive for a muddy curb, but she did not seem to care when water splashed near them. She held Sam's backpack while he adjusted his gloves, then handed it to him without fuss. Theo opened the bus door and said, "Morning, Sam." Sam looked up and answered morning. Adeline's eyes filled instantly, but she turned her face toward the street before the boy could see. Theo pretended to be checking the mirror. That became their small conspiracy, the adults learning to protect Sam's progress from the weight of their own emotion. At first, Theo and Adeline only exchanged practical sentences. He slept well. He forgot his library folder. There's a field trip form in his bag. Then, as winter loosened and the first pale signs of spring appeared along the roads, their conversations lengthened by a minute, then 2. Adeline asked about Lily's school play, and Theo admitted his daughter had been cast as a tree, but was performing the role with unnecessary dramatic intensity. Adeline laughed, and Sam, who had already taken his seat, looked out the window with a secret smile as if the sound pleased him. Theo asked whether Sam still wanted a dog, and Adeline said carefully that they were thinking about it. "Thinking in our house can mean anything from tomorrow to 5 years," she added. Theo told her that 5 years was a long time to make a boy wait for a dog. Adeline looked at him over the edge of Sam's lunch bag and said, "Is that professional transportation advice?" Theo said, "It is wisdom gathered from watching golden retrievers outrun my bus." She laughed again, and this time Theo did not look away quickly enough. He tried to be careful after that. Careful became a rule he repeated to himself whenever he found his attention lingering on her voice, her tired smile, the way she knelt to zip Sam's coat instead of asking someone else to do it. He reminded himself that gratitude could look like affection if you were lonely enough. He reminded himself that Adeline's world was not merely wealthy. It was watched, interpreted, and hungry for stories. He reminded himself that Lily mattered more than any feeling he had no business encouraging. His daughter had already lost the daily presence of one parent. Theo would not bring another adult into her life unless he was certain that adult would not vanish when the story became inconvenient. Besides, there was Sam. Sam's trust was still a newly repaired bridge. Theo refused to be the first careless step that broke it. Adeline seemed to understand the danger without being told. She never pushed. She did not invite Theo to expensive restaurants or send gifts he would have to refuse. Instead, she met him in ordinary places where the world had fewer sharp corners. Once, after a school safety meeting, she offered him coffee from a paper cup because she had bought too many on the way in. They stood in the parking lot while rain tapped on the hoods of cars, talking about children who refused vegetables and the strange guilt of single parents who could never be in 2 places at once. Another time, Lily forgot her jacket at the school office, and Adeline brought it to the bus lane because she happened to be nearby. Lily leaned out the door and said, "Are you the pretty rich lady?" Theo nearly choked on air. Adeline, instead of becoming offended or flattered, bent slightly and said, "I'm Sam's mom, and I sometimes forget my own jacket, too." Lily considered this answer, then said, "I'm a tree in the play." Adeline replied with complete seriousness, "That sounds like a role requiring great emotional range." From that moment, Lily approved of her. Approval, however, was not the same as readiness. Theo knew that. He kept his distance even as distance became less natural. He declined dinner twice, both times politely, both times with reasons that were not lies but not the whole truth. The third time, Adeline did not ask him to dinner. She asked whether Lily might like to join Sam and her for a Saturday walk past Sunshine's fence, followed by hot chocolate at a bakery where no one cared who owned what company. Theo stared at the message for longer than he should have. Lily read it over his shoulder because privacy, in her opinion, was a flexible concept. "We should go," she announced. "Sam is quiet, but not in a boring way." Theo looked at her. "That is not how we decide things." Lily shrugged. "It should be." They went. The walk was awkward for the first 10 minutes because all 4 of them were pretending not to understand that it mattered. Lily filled the gaps with commentary about worms' clouds and why adults walked slower when they were thinking. Sam said little, but when Sunshine came racing along the fence, he pointed with open delight and told Lily, "That's him." Lily pressed both hands to the fence and declared the dog excellent, but badly named because Sunshine was yellow and the dog was more toast-colored. Sam looked scandalized, then laughed. Not loudly, not freely enough to make everyone stop. But he laughed, and the sound moved through Adeline so visibly that Theo almost reached for her hand. He did not. He put both hands in his coat pockets and watched the children argue about dog colors as if nothing in the world could be more important. At the bakery, Lily and Sam sat beside each other with hot chocolate mustaches, while Theo and Adeline sat across from them. The place smelled of cinnamon and melted sugar. Outside, rain began to blur the windows. Adeline was telling Lily that corporate boardrooms were less interesting than school plays when an older woman at the next table recognized her. Theo saw the moment happen, the double take, the widening eyes, the quick glance toward him. He braced for intrusion, but Adeline merely smiled politely and turned back to Lily before the woman could enter the space between them. It was a small act, but Theo understood it. Adeline Frost was choosing not to let the world take this ordinary afternoon away from their children. After that, the four of them saw each other more often, though never quickly enough for gossip to feel accurate. Months passed in small, careful increments. Sam and Lily learned to occupy the same rooms without needing adults to arrange their friendship. Lily talked enough for two children. Sam listened enough to make her feel brilliant. Sometimes he answered. Sometimes he only nodded. Once, when Lily fell from the low branch of a tree in the Frost garden and scraped her knee, Sam ran inside for bandages before any adult moved. He returned with 3 boxes and a solemn expression, then told her, "You should not climb with socks on." Lily, crying and offended, said, "That is not helpful." Sam said, "It is true." Somehow that made her laugh through tears. Theo and Adeline moved even more slowly. Their first real dinner alone did not happen until late summer, and even then Theo chose a modest restaurant where the tables were close together and the menu had no words he needed help pronouncing. Adeline arrived without jewelry except her wedding ring on a chain around her neck. Theo noticed it immediately but said nothing. Halfway through the meal, she touched the chain and said, "I keep it because Daniel was real. Loving someone new would not make him less real." Theo nodded, understanding more than he could say. He told her about Rebecca then, not with bitterness, but with the tired honesty of a man who had finally stopped rehearsing anger. He admitted that after she left, he had become so focused on being reliable for Lily that he sometimes forgot how to want anything for himself. Adeline listened not as a CEO evaluating weakness, not as a lonely woman collecting reasons to admire him, but as someone who knew that survival could harden into habit. When he walked her to her car that night, the air smelled of summer rain on pavement. Neither of them moved to leave. Theo knew he should say goodnight and step back. He had built an entire life out of stepping back at the correct moment. But Adeline looked at him and said softly, "I need you to know something. Sam brought you into our lives, but he is not the reason I'm standing here." Theo felt the words land carefully, exactly where his fear had lived. She continued, "He chose a friend. I know that now. Whatever I feel, whatever this becomes or doesn't become, it has to be my choice. And yours, not his responsibility." For a long moment, Theo could not answer. He thought of the ballroom, of Sam's trembling hand, of Adeline crying without making the moment about herself. He thought of Lily declaring that trees required emotional range. He thought of sunshine racing the fence as if joy were a job and he had never missed a shift. Finally, Theo said, "I'm not an easy person to fit into your life." Adeline smiled a little sadly. "Theo, no real person fits neatly into anyone's life. We make room, or we don't." He looked at her then, and all his careful arguments grew quiet. When he kissed her, it was gentle and brief, less a beginning than an agreement to stop pretending nothing had begun. They told the children separately weeks later, and with more caution than most people used for legal contracts. Theo explained to Lily that he and Adeline were spending time together because they liked each other, not because of money, not because of Sam, not because of anything anyone online had once said. Lily listened, then asked whether this meant she could visit Sunshine more often. Theo said that was not the main point. Lily said, "It is one of the points," Adeline told Sam in the garden while he was lining up toy cars along the stone path. She said she cared about Mr. Marsh and that no grown-up decision belonged on Sam's shoulders. Sam was quiet for so long that her heart began to pound. Then he asked, "Will he still drive the bus?" Adeline smiled. "I think so." Sam nodded. Then okay. The wedding happened a year and a half after the gala, and nothing about it resembled the story the ballroom had tried to invent. There were no magazine covers, no cathedral full of donors, no spectacle polished for public consumption. They married in Adeline's backyard on a clear spring afternoon, with fewer than 40 people watching. Theo wore a suit that fit this time. Adeline carried no grand bouquet, only white flowers tied with ribbon from one of Daniel's old shirts. A detail she had asked Theo about first, because love, they had learned, did not erase what came before it. Sam stood beside her and talked through half the ceremony until Lily whispered, "You are not the priest." And he whispered back, "I know." Lily wore a pale dress and carried the rings with the severity of a royal guard. Pilar cried openly. Dr. Mora dabbed her eyes with a tissue and pretended she was only allergic to spring. When Theo spoke his vows, he did not promise to rescue anyone. He did not promise to heal every wound, fill every silence, or become the missing piece in a family broken by loss. He promised to show up. He promised to listen before fixing. He promised to love Sam and Lily without asking them to become symbols of anyone's happy ending. Adeline promised the same in her own way. She promised not to hide behind strength when she needed tenderness. She promised to choose Theo not because her son had once taken his hand in a ballroom, but because Theo had known when to let that hand go. After the ceremony, Sam ran across the lawn toward a large rescue dog with golden fur and a clumsy tail. The dog had arrived 3 months earlier from a shelter too energetic for his previous owners and too joyful to understand rejection. Sam had named him Maple because Sunshine already belonged to the fence, and because beginnings, he said, should be remembered properly. Maple knocked over a chair, stole a bread roll, and became instantly beloved by everyone except the caterer. Lily declared him toast-colored but acceptable. Sam laughed so hard he had to sit down in the grass. Years later, people still sometimes ask Theo why he continued driving Route 12. They asked with genuine confusion, as if marrying Adeline should have lifted him out of ordinary work the way fairy tales lifted poor men into castles. Theo always gave a version of the same answer. Because children still need to get to school. It sounded simple enough that most people smiled and let it pass. They did not understand that the bus had never been only a bus to him. It was a place where children carried their invisible burdens before the day had taught them how to hide better. It was where a quiet boy had once looked out a window and found a dog, and where a tired driver had slowed down without asking for thanks. It was where Theo had learned that being seen could matter more than being saved. On some mornings, Sam still rode with him, even though Adeline could have arranged any car, any driver, any convenience money could provide. He sat in the third row less often now. Sometimes he joined Lily when she came along. Sometimes he talked with other children. Sometimes he simply looked out the window because not every silence needed to be repaired. When they passed Maple Street, Theo still eased off the gas. Sunshine was older now, slower along the fence, his muzzle pale. But he still came out when he heard the bus. Sam would lift his hand. Sometimes he said, "Morning sunshine." Sometimes he only smiled. Theo understood then what he had not been able to explain in the ballroom. The greatest kindness was not always dramatic. It was not always a speech, a rescue, a vow, or a love story rich enough to make strangers applaud. Sometimes it was a greeting given every morning without demanding an answer. Sometimes it was slowing down for 3 extra seconds because a child's eyes had brightened at something no one else noticed. Sometimes it was refusing to turn trust into opportunity. And sometimes, if life was generous, the road you drove every day became the slow way home. So if there was a lesson Theo carried from all of it, it was this. People do not always need to be fixed before they can be loved. Some are waiting quietly and painfully for one person to see them without trying to use them, explain them, or hurry them into healing. Sam had not chosen a husband for his mother that night. He had chosen a witness for his own small courage. Adeline had not been handed a fairy tale by her son. She had learned, slowly, to choose a man who protected the truth when the world preferred a prettier lie. And Theo had not escaped his ordinary life by entering theirs. He had discovered that an ordinary life lived with patience and attention could become the most extraordinary gift one person offered another. The last time someone asked him why he still opened the bus door with the same words every morning, Theo only smiled. Then he turned back to the line of children climbing aboard, each one carrying a world no adult could fully see at first glance. "Good morning," he said to a small girl with tired eyes and mismatched socks. "I'm glad you're here." The girl looked surprised, then stepped onto the bus. Theo checked the mirror, waited until she found her seat, and pulled gently away from the curb. Outside, the day was beginning. Inside, for at least one child, the world had become slightly less invisible. Years later, people still told the story wrong. They told it at charity dinners in school hallways across polished tables, where expensive wine was poured into glasses that caught the light. They said a billionaire's silent son had chosen a school bus driver to become his mother's husband. They said it as if life had arranged itself like a fairy tale, as if one small hand had reached out in a ballroom and pulled an ordinary man into a golden future. Some versions made Theo sound like the luckiest man alive. Some made Adeline sound like a lonely queen rescued by humble goodness. Some made Sam sound like a magical child whose silence had been waiting for the perfect dramatic moment. Theo never corrected every version. He learned early that people preferred simple stories, especially when the truth asked them to look at themselves. But whenever someone told it in front of Sam, Theo would glance at him, and Sam, now older, taller, and no longer afraid of his own voice, would give the smallest smile. They both knew the truth. Sam had not chosen a husband that night. He had chosen to be seen. Theo kept driving Route 12 long after he no longer needed the paycheck. At first, people thought it was pride, then stubbornness, then perhaps some charming symbol of humility. Adeline understood better. So did Lily. So did Sam. The bus was never just a job to Theo. It was a moving room full of unfinished stories. Every morning, children climbed its steps carrying more than backpacks. Some carried fear from houses where voices had been too loud before sunrise. Some carried loneliness from bedrooms where no one had remembered to ask how they slept. Some carried pressure, hunger, shame, worry, secrets, hopes so fragile they had not yet been spoken aloud. Adults liked to believe childhood was light, but Theo had spent too many mornings looking into too many tired eyes to believe that. Children were not simple because they were young. They were simply less practiced at hiding the weight. So he kept opening the door. He kept saying good morning as if it mattered because it did. He kept learning names, remembering favorite seats, noticing when a child who usually talked too much had gone quiet, or when a child who never smiled suddenly watched the trees as if waiting for something beautiful to appear. He kept a box of tissues near the dashboard, extra pencils in the glove compartment, and a silence soft enough for children to rest inside it. He still slowed at Maple Street. Sunshine, the golden retriever behind the fence, grew older year by year. His once wild sprint became a trot, then a stiff little shuffle, but he still came out when he heard the bus. Sam always looked. Even when he was 12 and pretended not to care about sentimental things, he looked. Theo would ease off the gas just slightly, honoring a promise so old and quiet that no one else on the bus understood its full meaning. One autumn morning, Sunshine was not there. The fence stood empty, the yard still the grass silver with frost. Theo slowed anyway. In the mirror, he saw Sam turn his head. Neither of them said anything. The next day, there was a small sign tied to the fence with a blue ribbon. "Thank you for loving our sunshine." Sam read it from the window and his face became very still. Theo pulled the bus forward, stopped safely at the curb beyond the house, and waited a moment longer than the schedule allowed. Behind them, the children grew quiet in that mysterious way children sometimes do when grief enters the room and asks not to be embarrassed. Sam did not cry on the bus, but that evening he sat beside Maple, the rescue dog, in their own backyard, and pressed his face into the dog's golden fur. Theo found him there near sunset. He did not ask if Sam was okay. He sat beside him on the grass, close enough to be present, far enough not to crowd him. After a long while, Sam said, "He was the first thing I wanted to see every day." Theo nodded. "I know." Sam wiped his face with his sleeve. "You saw that before I told you." Theo looked toward the darkening yard. "Sometimes people tell us things without words." Sam leaned against him, then no longer a silent little boy, but still someone who remembered what silence had cost. "Thank you for slowing down," he said. Theo put an arm around his shoulders. Thank you for letting me know it mattered. Adeline watched them from the kitchen window, one hand resting against the glass. There were moments when love humbled her more than grief ever had. Grief had broken her open, but love kept asking her to stay open, to resist the old temptation to control every danger, schedule every healing, buy every solution. Theo had taught her that some wounds did not respond to force, no matter how loving the force believed itself to be. Sam had taught her that a child could be surrounded by help and still be waiting for someone simply to notice what made his eyes brighten. Lily had taught her that family could arrive wearing mismatched socks and asking rude questions with a clean heart. And slowly, almost without realizing it, Adeline had stopped living as though strength meant never needing anyone. She learned to let Theo make coffee badly. She learned to let Lily rearrange the flowers in rooms designed by professionals. She learned to let Sam grieve his father without trying to rush him toward peace. She learned that a home was not made safe by wealth walls, staff, or perfect plans. It became safe when the people inside it were allowed to be fully human. Theo never became comfortable with being called a hero. He knew too well how dangerous that word could be. Heroes belonged on pedestals, and pedestals were only another kind of distance. What he had done for Sam was not magic. It was attention. It was patience repeated until it became trust. It was choosing not to make a child's pain useful. It was refusing to accept a reward that had never been offered. He wished more people understood that kindness did not always announce itself. Sometimes it did not look like saving someone at all. Sometimes it looked like driving the same road every morning and slowing near a white fence. Sometimes it looked like not asking a question when silence was the only answer someone could give. Sometimes it looked like seeing a person clearly without immediately deciding what they should become. On the day Sam graduated from Briarwood, he stood on the front lawn in a navy suit, taller than Adeline now, with Lily beside him taking far too many pictures. Maple gray around the muzzle lay under a tree wearing a ridiculous ribbon Lily had tied around his collar. After the ceremony, Sam walked over to Theo, who was standing near the edge of the crowd, exactly where he had always preferred to be. For a moment, Theo saw both versions of him at once. The young man with steady eyes and the 6-year-old boy in a miniature tuxedo crossing a ballroom because one person had made the world feel less lonely. Sam hugged him without warning. Theo froze, then held him tightly. "You still gonna drive the bus?" Sam asked when he pulled back. Theo smiled. "Tomorrow morning." Sam laughed softly. "You know you don't have to." Theo looked toward the line of buses beyond the school gates, their yellow sides shining in the afternoon sun. "I know." Sam studied him, then nodded as if he understood completely. "Somebody might need you to slow down." Theo's throat tightened. That's the idea. That evening, after the guests had gone and the house had settled into the soft disorder that followed celebration, Theo sat on the back steps with Adeline. Inside, Lily and Sam were arguing over music while Maple snored near the kitchen. The sky was turning violet, and the first stars had begun to appear. Adeline rested her head on Theo's shoulder. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. Theo knew which night she meant. There had only ever been one night that divided their lives into before and after. Sometimes he said, "Do you?" She smiled faintly. "Not the way other people do." Theo took her hand. "How do you remember it?" Adeline looked out over the yard where their children had grown, where grief had softened without disappearing, where love had taken root slowly enough to survive. "I remember that our son trusted you with the truth," she said, "and you gave it back to him untouched." Theo closed his eyes for a moment. Of all the things anyone had ever said about that night, that was the only version that felt complete. And maybe that is what love is in its quietest and most honest form. Not rescue, not possession, not a fairy tale forced onto people who are still bleeding. Love is the courage to see someone as they are and not turn them into a tool for your own longing. It is the patience to stand beside a closed door without pounding on it. It is the humility to understand that healing belongs to the wounded person, not to the one waiting nearby. Some people come into our lives with grand promises, loud declarations, and beautiful performances. Others arrive gently, almost invisibly, and change everything simply because they notice what the rest of the world missed. So if this story has stayed with you, ask yourself this. Who was the person who saw you when you felt invisible? Who slowed down for you when everyone else rushed past? Who heard what you could not say out loud and stayed anyway? And just as importantly, who in your life might be waiting for that from you right now? A child, a parent, a friend, a stranger who smiles too quickly, someone quiet at the edge of the room, someone who does not need you to fix them, save them, or turn their pain into a lesson. Someone who may only need you to look closely and say with your actions, if not your words, I see you. I'm glad you're here. If you have someone like that in your life, tell them before another day passes. And if this story reminded you of them, share it with someone who needs to remember that being truly seen can change a life.